Joe Biden is handling Donald Trump a lit fuse on inflation. Like a zombie who refuses to die, Bidenflation just keeps going because federal spending just keeps going. Last week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released new CPI numbers showing inflation jumping to an annualized 4.8%. That's up 5.5 points in just 6 months, nearly the pace of the worst of Bidenflation. So consider that just 6 months ago we had deflation. It was an innocent age with the front pages of America bespeckled with celebrations how Bidenflation was over. As Paul Krugman famously wrote, quote, "We won the war against inflation at very little cost." Of course, there was enormous cost, but it was blue-collars struggling to feed their kids, not the people at Paul Krugman's cocktail parties. Problem is, even with the cost, we did not, in fact, win the war against inflation. So what happened? Simple. The federal government never cut spending, which made it impossible for the Federal Reserve to fight inflation. The problem is the federal government, both parties, is addicted to spending. It's how they pay their donors, how they pay their activists. It's how they buy elections. As for the Fed, before June, they had been bringing down inflation by selling their enormous hoard of assets, the Fed balance sheet. But in June, they stopped. To see why, when the Fed wants to print money, one way is to literally type a bunch of ones and zeros on an Excel sheet, pretend it's money, and then use that money to buy everything in sight, mainly federal debt and mortgages. This is called quantitative easing, or QE, and the proceeds go on the Fed's balance sheet. It's their assets, the proceeds of the Fed's counterfeiting. Now, during the pandemic, the Fed typed a lot of zeros. Their balance sheet went from $3.8 trillion before the pandemic to almost $9 trillion by the peak of Bidenflation. So $6 trillion created out of nothing. Alas, all that printing went directly into inflation. To cancel that inflation, the Fed reversed to selling those assets, called quantitative tightening. So they would sell, say, government bonds and just cancel the dollars. They vanish. In fact, they were selling over $60 billion of federal debt per month, which was canceling Biden's deficits, up until June, when the Fed slashed sales by half because they were getting nervous that deficits were getting so big, financial markets couldn't handle them. And so, in just 6 months, we went from negative 0.7% inflation to 4.8%. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. With Biden looting the Treasury and the Fed having bowed out, Trump is walking into an inflation wood chipper. He'll need fast growth, and he'll need fast spending cuts to curb Biden's inflation. Now, Trump's asking for all the right things from Congress, tax and regulation cuts for growth, along with drill baby drill, and spending cuts with DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. But Congress will not feel the pressure unless voters understand that it's congressional spending that is keeping the inflation going. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.